Hi, I'm Elizabeth Ann Atkins and I write books. I have a really powerful message for women writers today. We have so much power and so much freedom to express ourselves. It is our obligation to do so. I say this in the context of two new movies that are coming out that are really awesome. I can't wait to see them. One is Mary Shelley. She wrote Frankenstein, one of the most classic celebrated books on the planet ever. And she wrote it during the early 1800s, which was an extremely oppressive time for women. The other movie is called Colette, and it's about a woman in Paris who ghostwrites for her husband, who was a writer, during the early 1900s. And both books illustrate the horrific sexism and discrimination that women writers have experienced throughout history. I've taught college and university level writing classes, including one course called Women in Literature, and we scanned women writers throughout history from around the world. And at one point, in many countries, women were not allowed to read and write. It was illegal. And then some women who did learn to write were called scribblers. Scribblers. Scribblers, like little kids scribbling crayon on paper. And so then it was extremely difficult for women to actually get their work published. And many women, like George Eliot, published under male names or anonymous in order to get published. And so my message is for women writers today. We have so much power and freedom to express ourselves. I'm especially talking about women here in the United States, where we're protected by the First Amendment. And so we have to utilize that power to write. I'm going to share something that is deeply personal to me, but I think other women need to hear it in this context. I'm deeply spiritual. I meditate. And in meditation, my spirit guides give me information and guidance and inspiration that I have to use to live my best life and experience my most infinite, limitless potential as a writer, as a woman, as a citizen. And so when I meditate, I learned how to do a form of meditation where you can communicate with all these powerful entities. And it's so amazing. It's healing. It's informative. Oh my gosh, it's indescribable. But my very first time in this type of meditation, it was called a shamanic journey. I was introduced to what's called my Council of Women Writers. And when you do a shamanic journey in meditation, the spirits come to you, the entities, the guides, they come to you independent of your imagination. These were things I'd never thought of before. I entered the meditation without any intention of this type of experience, but it happened because it was the message I'm supposed to receive and share. And so I was introduced to my Council of Women Writers. And these women, who included Virginia Woolf, Zora Neale Hurston, Louise Mae Alcott, and others, told me that because I live in the modern era with unprecedented freedoms for women writers, that it's my obligation to write in ways that share empowering messages and philosophies. One such example of doing so is my book, Husbands Incorporated, which talks about my revolutionary philosophies about relationships and marriage which took tremendous courage to write. I'm very proud of it, and it enables me to express a new way to live in love. And so my message to other women is that if you have been blessed with the gift, the calling of being a writer, have the courage to express your most authentic self and your ideas. And think of it in the context of all the women around the world throughout history who were never given that opportunity, never given the opportunity to share their ideas or their stories or their philosophies. Many women throughout history have been killed for sharing stories that could heal others. I mean, the women, millions of women throughout Europe were killed in witch hunts, burned at the stake, put on trial because they were storytellers with the intention of healing people. And so we don't have that risk today. We have the freedom and the power to write our stories, to share philosophies, to share ideas that can influence and inspire people, that can make powerful changes in society. And so my message today is that it comes from my council of women writers who are always encouraging me to write and to be as prolific as possible, to focus, to bring these ideas up and out into the world. And if this idea of my spiritual council of women writers sounds totally crazy, I want to share something from one of the most respected authors ever. Napoleon Hill wrote Think and Grow Rich. Now, this is my copy that I purchased in 2000, and I've read it and carried it on trips and such so much that the cover is missing because, I mean, I write on the pages, it's got notes all over it. But in one chapter called The Sixth Sense, it's chapter 14, the sixth sense is called The Door to the Temple of Wisdom. The Door to the Temple of Wisdom, the 13th step toward riches. And so he said his goal was to improve his character. And he wanted to do that by emulating the people in history that he most admired. Now, this is a man writing, I think it was the 1920s when he wrote this. So his frame of reference for the most admired people throughout history are all men. So that's okay. Let me just read to you some of this because I want you to see that he used this technique of communicating with the spiritual world to transform himself to become one of the best-selling authors ever on the planet. There are millions and millions of copies of this book in circulation. So, he said, long before I had ever written a line for publication or endeavored to deliver a speech in public, I followed the habit of reshaping my own character by trying to imitate the 9 men whose lives and life works had been most impressive to me. These 9 men were Emerson, Paine, Edison, Darwin, Lincoln, Burbank, Napoleon, Ford, and Carnegie. Every night over a long period of years, I held an imaginary council meeting with this group whom I called my invisible counselors. The procedure was this. Just before going to sleep at night, I would shut my eyes and see in my imagination this group of men seated around me at my council table. Here I had not only an opportunity to sit among those whom I considered to be great, but I actually dominated the group by serving as the chairman. I had a very definite purpose in indulging my imagination through these nightly meetings. My purpose was to rebuild my own character so it would represent a composite of the characters of my imaginary counselors. Realizing, as I did early in life, that I had to overcome the handicap of birth in an environment of ignorance and superstition, I deliberately assigned myself the task of voluntary rebirth through the method I have described above. So he goes on to say how this works, and he would literally talk to each person. Like he would say, Mr. Lincoln, I desire to build my own character, the keen sense of justice, the untiring spirit of patience, the sense of humor, the human understanding, and the tolerance which were your distinguishing characteristics. Mr. Ford, I wish to acquire your spirit of persistence, the determination, poise, and self-confidence which have enabled you to master poverty and to organize, unify, and simplify human effort so I may help others to follow in your footsteps. And so he has a sentence addressing each of those 9 men. And then later he says, each of these 9 men developed individual characteristics which inspired me. For example, Lincoln developed the habit of always being late, then walking around in solemn parade. He always wore an expression of seriousness upon his face. Rarely did I see him smile. That was not true of the others. Burbank and Payne often indulged in witty repartee, which seemed at times to shock the other members of the cabinet. He goes on and on about all this, and the things that each of these men would say, like Napoleon would say, no apples, no state. And fascinating. These meetings, he writes, became so realistic that I became fearful of their consequences and discontinued them for several months. The experiences were so uncanny, I was afraid if I continued them, I would lose sight of the fact that the meetings were purely experiences of my imagination. So the point is that he did this for years, and it worked. These spirits of these men he called upon came to life, and they gave him guidance. So I say that to sort of substantiate for you, not for me, but for you, the fact that my council of women writers who talk to me the same way that Napoleon Hill's council of people talk to him is so powerful. And the message is that we as women writers have so much power and freedom to express ourselves that we're obligated to do so, to help people with our ideas and our philosophies and our messages that can transform lives, maybe even save lives. So I hope you get a chance to see Mary Shelley the film and Colette the film, because they will both shed light on the trials and tribulations that women writers had and the things they had to go through in terms of oppression and discrimination. And I hope that those will fire you up to do your own writing and harness the power that you have right now to express yourself through the written word in a way that can have a positive and powerful impact on the world. Enjoy.